All righty. Well, first of all, I certainly appreciate the attendance today. I know the weather is anything but stellar out there, and so thank you all for coming. A couple of things. This will be the second to the last class, so I will talk a little bit at the end, hopefully if I have time, what the last class will consist of. It'll be just slightly different, but we will still maintain this theme of technology, which is what this class has really been about. So today we are going to talk about World War II, the war in the air. And I have made a very conscious decision in this class to not go into the war against Japan. So we will not get to strategic bombing with the B-29. We will not cover the atomic weapons dropped on Hiroshima in this class, because I've pretty much covered all that in my atomic bomb class. So many of you have taken that, so I would prefer not to do that. So the other piece, though, is I think technologically we see a huge, most of the big changes will actually occur in Europe. So we will talk in great detail about technology in regards to strategic bombing today, and I think really most of that really was better confined to the European theater and the bombing of Germany and the bombing by Germany of Great Britain, rather than the technology being used versus Japan. So hopefully that's not a disappointment to a lot of you, but I will at some time in the future rerun my atomic bomb class, and we'll certainly get to it at that point. All right. I think many of you are familiar with the famous phrase from the Battle of Britain by Winston Churchill, and I'm going to just take a second to read this to you, just in case you aren't familiar with the entire piece. And Churchill says, "What General Weygand called the Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour." I'm sure you are almost all familiar with that last line, but you're probably not familiar with the fact that he mentions perverted science in this speech. And what this says to me, and I think to the point of this class, is that the capabilities developed by the synergy of engineering and science had really made World War II a technological total war, and that certainly was a product of the Second Industrial Revolution. So we see, even at this point, we're talking about science being critical to the militaries at this time. And when we look at the Battle of Britain, and of course this is going to be an aviation battle, and I think Churchill's quite aware when he's making this speech that that's what this is about. But we look at what the capabilities were. And we have the Germans have occupied France. So the Germans have a very short distance to get to Britain. What will happen later in the war, when the British the U.S. begin to bomb Germany, they will have to go across France. So keep that in mind, that there's going to be a significant distance change for the Germans versus the British or the Allies. So that's critical in this lecture. The other thing is the aircraft that are going to be used in this point. The British are going to use Spitfires, but they're primarily at this time going to use a fighter craft that's less capable called the Hurricane. The bulk of German forces will be using a plane called the Bf-109, or we would probably more refer to it as the Me-109. The Me-109 is a very capable point defense fighter as well. And the Germans will deploy 900 Me-109s versus in excess of 600 plus British Hurricanes mostly and Spitfires. So they will have a numerical advantage in aircraft. They will also have 300 Me-110s. The Me-110 is what's designed to be a bomber escort. It is a long-range fighter aircraft, but it is a heavy fighter. It is not particularly capable. It is not even able to defend itself realistically against the Hurricane. The Hurricane would be a superior aircraft to this. So again, we have 900 very capable Messerschmitts versus 600 pretty capable British aircraft. But none of these aircraft have much capability for long-distance flying. They're all point defense fighters. And the famous Spitfire, and this is a very early version. Some of you Spitfire aficionados out there may notice that there are some significant differences here. But this early version of the Spitfire would have been a common aircraft in 1940 at the Battle of Britain. We talked about how it was built off of the Supermarine Schneider Trophy Racers by R.J. Mitchell. He was the designer of that aircraft, and the learnings from that racing that in the 1920s and 1930s will be a direct capability of these fighter aircraft in World War II. Indeed, the same designer will make both aircraft. The other key thing with the Spitfire, of course, is the fact that it is powered by the Merlin engine, which is a follow-on to the very successful Rolls-Royce R engine that was also used in the Schneider Trophy races. So again, we see air racing has developed this particular aircraft, and that Merlin engine will be not only used for the Spitfire, it's also used in the Hurricane, it's used in the Lancaster bomber, it's used in numerous aircraft in World War II. It's a highly successful engine. And I will send you a video of a comparison of that engine and the German DB605 in relationship to a P-51B and to the Bf-109. So I think you'll find that those of you that are really into engineering will love Greg's aircraft. It's and there's a million of them. I don't know where he gets the time to make all these podcasts, but you'll like it. But one more thing on this aircraft before we move on is that it is armed with 8 rifle caliber machine guns. There's 4 rifle caliber machine guns, the same caliber basically used in World War I, 4 in each wing. So it has a lot of firepower in effect that it fires a lot of bullets, but the bullets that it fires are not particularly effective against they are rifle caliber ammunition. Well, its competitor is the Bf-109. And the Bf-109 is certainly one of the most successful aircraft in history. It was a top-of-the-line fighter in the Spanish Civil War in 1938, and it will go on until 1945 to also be a very capable fighter aircraft. They built 33,000 of these, and they were actually built some after the war. The Spanish built them after World War II, and the Czechs built some for export sales also after World War II. So it had a very, very long and successful career. The Bf-109 is credited with shooting down more aircraft than any other plane in history. So it has more victories attributed to this aircraft than any other. So one thing to note on this aircraft is it has a different armament. It has 2 rifle caliber machine guns firing through the propeller, and it has a 20 millimeter cannon in each wing. And the 20 millimeter cannon has much more capability to down an aircraft than a rifle caliber bullet. This particular model, I chose to use this picture even though it's not a common version of this aircraft, also had another 20 millimeter cannon firing through the propeller spinner. Much more common to see 2 20s in the wings than 2 rifle caliber machine guns. Of course, as the war goes on, the armament of this aircraft will change significantly. Well, the Germans, right after the fall of France, offer peace to Britain. And Winston Churchill totally rejects the offer by the Germans for armistice, and I'm sure that we're all fortunate today that he did so. But they are basically looking at several distinct events of what will be known as the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain, I think, should be broken up into 4 separate parts. The first part is going to be from the 17th of July to the 12th of August, And that will be what's called the Channel Battle. In other words, to attain air superiority over the English Channel by destroying commerce and, of course, keeping the Royal Navy out of the Channel. If they can keep the Royal Navy out of the Channel, then indeed they can invade England from the sea. If they can't do that, then indeed there is no point in doing this. So the whole point of this battle is really going to be if they can maintain air superiority, or preferably air supremacy, over southern England so they can invade Britain. So that goes on till the 26th of June till the 16th of July. It is not particularly successful, but they decide that they are going to now go after the Royal Air Force directly with what is called Alderaangriff, or Eagle Attack. And that is from the 13th of August till the 6th of September. This is the battle we're probably most familiar with, where they're bombing British airfields in order to get air superiority or supremacy. That is very critical, of course, but the problem with this, some of this, is the fact that the Messerschmitt only has a 400-mile range. So it can go 200 miles out, it can fight for a brief time, and then it has to fly 200 miles back. That's all the range the aircraft has. The Spitfire and the Hurricane are similar. They have very limited range. They are point defense fighters. They are not bomber escort capable, particularly at this time. So that goes on quite heavily. They do also start to bomb some British cities. All these attacks are designed to get the RAF to come up, attack the bombers, and then the German fighters will destroy the RAF fighters, and then, of course, they can continue to bomb at will once that is achieved. Again, this doesn't quite get to where they want it to be. The next major grouping is from 7th of September till October 2nd, and that is commonly referred to as the Blitz. And the Blitz is a direct attack, daylight attack primarily, on British cities and industry. Again, the point is to bring up the RAF to defend those targets, and then the Messerschmitts will destroy the RAF. And finally, from the 3rd to 31st of October, the Germans have taken such great losses that they begin to do night bombing, because they cannot afford the losses that are taking place during the daytime. And that night bombing goes from the 3rd to the 31st of October. And they will also have some pinprick raids against airfields, again trying to, and fighter sweeps, again trying to destroy the RAF. So that's the basis of the Battle of Britain as we're familiar with it today. Well, the British have done something very different, though. They have come up with an idea called chain home. And this is the first early warning radar system. It's an integrated defense system based on radar. And it's extremely important for the Battle of Britain. And it will be the first stage in what's commonly known at this time as the Wizard War. And this will be, of course, the first Wizard War. The second Wizard War would probably be Harry Potter. So, just so you're aware. But this will be known as the Wizard War, and you can see a chain home system here. This is actually a later version because you can see these radars are for lower level capability. Well, the British are very, very concerned, as we've talked about in this class, about bombing. They were bombed in World War I. They believe that the bomber will always get through. There's two factions in the RAF. There is the faction for strategic bombing. They feel that strategic bombing is the only answer. The bomber cannot be stopped, and you have to completely destroy the enemy's cities and capability first, or they will destroy yours, because nothing can stop the bomber. There are people, though, that think that that isn't necessarily true. They think that the bomber can be defeated, particularly in daylight, using radar. And, of course, we've talked about Robert Watson Watt. We've talked about him several times in this class. And Robert Watson Watt is the person that really drives this radar to be a useful product. It's also Hugh Dowding, and we've talked a little bit about Hugh as well. And Hugh is in charge of RAF Fighter Command. So he's always at odds with the bomber barons, as we'll use that term, that he thinks they need to build more fighter aircraft. more fighter aircraft are going to be absolutely critical to maintaining the safety of British cities. And he becomes a huge supporter of the chain home system. So by 1937, they have already created 5 of these groupings to protect London. As time goes on, they will create a chain home system that spreads the entire south and eastern coast of Great Britain against European continent. So they will build more and more and more. But by 37, they already had 5 of these in place. So they are making a very concerted effort to use radar. Well, the fact is, if you have radar, the radar this time isn't particularly good. So, but it gets better. So by 38, they create a radar that can not only tell you that a bomber is coming, but what altitude it's coming at. So that's a critical thing. If you're going to direct fighters to intercept bombers, you need to know what altitude those bombers are. Also, the chain home system is not very capable for low level. And by 1939, they come up with a secondary type of radar that can detect aircraft as low as 500 feet. Below 500 feet, they are still undetectable at this time. But again, this is big advances very quickly. And what happens is they're going to have more and more and more capability and devote assets to this. But the problem also is this stuff is all brand new. So people don't really know how to use it. And it's a problem for them because they don't have any good way to coordinate this. So there's a test in 1937, early on, at Bawdsey. And at Bawdsey, the idea is there's going to be British bombers pretending to be enemy bombers, and they're going to be directed by radar to intercept those bombers. Well, Hugh Dowding is at Bawdsey, and there's total chaos trying to communicate to these fighter aircraft where these bombers are. And eventually he can hear the bombers flying over Bawdsey, and they have not been intercepted at all. And this is a huge embarrassment for the radar people. But Dowding sees the fact it's not the radar that's the problem. The problem is how they're directing the fighters to the radar. And what he will do then is he will create what's known as the Dowding system. And the Dowding system has all the radars report to it via telephone lines, massive amounts of telephone lines, so they're defensible, or hardened, I guess would be the best way to put it. And they all report to a central location in London, and then that central location tracks everything, all the information, and directs that information to the individual fighter groups. So the coordination of their radar will actually be a huge advantage. And I really want to draw attention to this picture. When we look at this picture of a control room, notice that nearly every person in that room is a female. So early on, the British made a conscious decision that they were going to involve the women of Britain into the defense of Britain as well. The United States, of course, will do something similar. We're all familiar with Rosie the Riveter. But indeed, you look at the amount of manpower that they're saving by using these women, and very capable to run this type of system. And you would not see this in Germany until perhaps 1943, when they actually decide to have total war. The Germans actually do not have a total war economy until 1943, which seems relatively unbelievable. But indeed, that is how they ran things. So I think this is a really critical picture to see how women were very, very important to this entire system. Yes?
Can you go back, please?
I sure can.
What is clear format, the last 2 words?
I'm sorry?
Not in code, the last sentence.
Collected, collated, and fed back pilots in clear format. So basically, they're going to direct the fighters to go to point X at altitude Y. So in other words, they're very, very simple directions. And remember, they're all on the same, each squadron is on a same wavelength. So you can have too much, if people are chattering on the radio, they're going to wipe each other out. Now, individual squadrons would have different radio bands, but a single squadron would have, say, as many as 9 to 15 planes. And you would have that problem with radio discipline. So that's why everything had to be very simplified. Yes, Ellen?
Did the secrets act?
I would assume they did. I'm sure they would. I mean, we'll talk about the Norden bomb site in that bit as well. So I'm fairly confident that would be the case. Okay? All right, so the chain home system has pretty good range. It has a range of about 100, 120 miles. So they can actually see German bomber formations getting together over France to attack Great Britain. So they have that capability. And now what they're going to do is they're going to start directing their fighters to intercept those bomber groups. And what's going to happen, of course, is this is going to be using the Dowding system to a very practical way. Because if I don't use the Dowding system, the numbers are approximately 30%. So if I send fighters up to intercept a bomber without having radar capability, they have about a 30% chance of intercepting that bomber group. With the Dowding system and the chain home radar, that number goes up to 75%, and on certain occasions, 100% of British fighters intercepted German bombers. Well, of course, what that is that's going to be a force multiplier. Every German fighter without radar might find 30% of the time to attack RAF fighters. The British are operating at 75 to 100%. So in other words, 2 German fighters are the equivalent of 1 British fighter as far as intercept capability. So that is a huge, huge advantage. And force multiplication is going to be one of the reasons I believe that indeed the British win this battle. I don't think that it would be possible without it. So the fact is that the bomber will always get through is not going to be in daylight. The bomber will get through, but it'll take such unacceptable losses that it's not capable of sustaining that offensive. So the bomber in daytime cannot always get through. Well, the Germans do make some effort to attack the chain home system. Problem with this is the chain home system is relatively resistant to the type of bombs being used in World War II. And we'll talk a little bit more later on that as well. But to attack a metal tower is not very easily. Now, the plane they needed to do this was the Stuka. As we talked about earlier, the Stuka took such severe losses over France that they don't have a lot of them left. The second problem with the Stuka is it's relatively slow, and even hurricanes can easily shoot down a Stuka. So the Stukas require huge amounts of support in order to make these missions. In fact, they are eventually withdrawn completely from the Battle of Britain because they're just taking too many losses. So again, the effort to destroy these radar towers is basically abandoned by the Germans very early on. Probably they should have put a lot more effort into this. Well, German losses continue to mount and mount and mount in these daylight attacks. And they eventually are going to resort, as we talked about, to the Blitz or night bombing. But casualties on both sides are extremely high. The Germans during this time lose 1,977 aircraft. The British, on the other hand, lose 1,744 aircraft. So it would seem that that's not a lot of difference. The problem is this, though. The British are fighting over Britain. If they bail out of their plane, they can get back into another plane the next day. The Germans, on the other hand, when they survive being attacked and bail out of their planes, they become prisoners of war. So it is more the attrition of aircrew that causes the British to win the Battle of Britain rather than the attrition of aircraft itself. And the climax for the British is on September 15th. The Germans launch massive attacks in the daylight to attack London. Again, this is to bring British fighters up so the Messerschmitts can shoot them down. What happens then is they lose 60 German bombers to only 26 RAF aircraft on the 15th. And people see this as the climax of the Battle of Britain, particularly the British do. Hitler, at that point, postpones the invasion of Great Britain. And so to this day, we have, or the British celebrate September 15th as Battle of Britain Day. Well, at the height of these attacks, Churchill goes and visits a squadron of RAF fighters. And he's so moved by their efforts and their fighting day after day, going up many, many times in a day, many sorties per day. And he says, never in the history of mankind has so much been owed by so many to so few. That very famous line. He is going to use that on August 20th to address Commons. And he starts saying the line to his close associate and military advisor, Pug Ismay. And Pug Ismay goes, mankind, what about Jesus and his apostles? And Churchill thinks, you know what, good old Pug, he really has, that's really the right idea. And he changes it to the line we're more familiar with is, never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few. He's talking about fighter pilots, but I think he easily could be talking about the people that created the chain home system, like Robert Watson Watt and Hugh Dowding, people, these scientists, these women working in these plotting things, this small group of people that allowed a smaller group of German fighters to defeat a larger group of Luftwaffe aircraft. So I think those people certainly should be considered in this phrase as well. Well, what happens next, of course, is the Germans are switching to night bombing. It's very critical that they switch to night bombing because they cannot afford the losses. It's much more difficult to shoot an aircraft down even with radar at night because they can't be seen as easily. It's difficult for AAA anti-aircraft artillery to shoot down bombers at night even with radar because, again, there are visibility issues. But the other problem with night bombing is it's very, very difficult to find your target. So if you're going to hit a precision target at night, that's very difficult. Sometimes in bad weather, it's hard to even find cities. So the Germans have thought this through, and they have come up with a thing called the Lorenz system for the Lufthansa, their civil aviation group. And the idea of the Lorenz system was to use radio beams to help an aircraft land in bad weather or at night into a runway. They take that system and basically fortify it. They use much, much more sensitive receivers and much, much more powerful beams, and they create a system called Knickebein. And Knickebein is a very, very interesting method. What you do is, again, this is all possible because the Germans control France. So keep that in mind. So we could put a radio beam in Denmark. We could put another radio beam in France. We shoot one beam out. We shoot the other beam out. Where those two beams intersect is the target. So I send my bombers down one stream, and you can see that in this picture very well. So I send, here's this beam coming from Stolberg, here's one from Cleve, and they're both intersecting over Derby. So I send my bombers on this line. When they hear with a second receiver this beam, they know they're on their target and they drop their bombs. These are line-of-sight systems, so they really don't have a lot of range because of the curvature of the Earth, about 300 miles. But because we're in here, the Germans can use this system very effectively. Well, a gentleman, and again, I'll send you another video on this, named R.V. Jones, he starts to think that the Germans have some sort of blind bombing capability. And Jones has a captured German bomber, and he sees that the Lorenz system in that bomber is really sensitive, way much more than you would need for a landing on a runway. And they also are monitoring conversations of captured German aircrew. And they start to get the impression that the Germans indeed have this blind bombing capability. And what they will do next is they will get a very sensitive receiver from the United States. They actually don't have their capability in Britain at this time. And they get this, off-the-rack receiver from the U.S., and they start flying around Britain looking for beams. And sure enough, they find a beam. And then they track down that beam and they run into another beam. And that beam intersects directly over the factory that makes Merlin engines. It's amazing that the Germans have that scoped out this well, but indeed they did. They spent a lot of time on reconnaissance aircraft to come up with this capability. And this will be known as the Battle of the Beams, or we would probably be more familiar with the term electronic warfare. And indeed, R.V. Jones, is a very, very key player in this battle. Well, what is he going to do? They begin to broadcast another beam. And that other beam is short of the target. So when the German bombers, expecting to hit their own beam, don't hit their own beam, but before that they hit this fake British beam, and they drop their bombs into a field. Well, the Germans catch on to this relatively quickly, but they have another system called X-Girat. And X-Girat is going to be a much more capable ultra-high frequency unit. But this unit has the limitations of they don't have a lot of them. And they equip one specific group called KG-100, KGR-100, and they are going to be pathfinders. So in other words, they will drop their bombs onto the target or drop incendiaries or flares so other bombers following can then drop their bombs in the proper location. The X-Girat system is incredibly accurate. It's capable of dropping bombs within 100 yards of its center line and a couple of 100 yards deep. That's equivalent to daylight bombing at its best. So it's a very, very sophisticated and excellent system. Well, they start to use this system to bomb perhaps Coventry, which is bombed by KGR-100 and then by other bombers following on. And you can see the damage at Coventry Cathedral here. It's getting to be extremely effective methodology for the Germans to use to attack German cities. Fortunately for the British, Heinkel HE-111 is shot down. It's in the water. They raise it up out of the water, and they begin to analyze its electronic warfare capability. And they see the X-Girat system in there. And of course, now they know what frequency and what they need to do, and they begin to broadcast beams again to defeat that system. And they do that. The Germans quickly again realize that their system has been undermined, and they begin to forget about using these types of systems. They just don't think that they're usable. The other thing that happens too, though, is on June 22nd of 1941, the Germans attack Russia. When the Germans attack Russia, the Luftwaffe is taken away from bombing Britain and is spent strictly primarily to the Eastern Front to attack the Soviet Union. So again, that changes the whole dynamic of bombing Britain. Well, the British realize that they've got the same problem. They cannot get their planes over targets in daylight unescorted by fighters. Their fighter planes are much like the Me-109. They don't have a lot of range. So, for example, the raid on Aalborg, Denmark, they lose every plane that made the raid. So they had 12 planes in the raid. One plane turned back on supposed engine failure. The other 11 go on to bomb the target, and they are all shot down. So they realized very quickly, the British, and we talked about the Wilhelmshaven raid as well, that the British don't have the capability without escorting their bombers to bomb Germany. So they must only bomb at night. Well, the British think that at night they're more capable than the Germans because our people are just better trained. And so this isn't going to be a problem. We'll be able to hit precision targets at night. Well, that doesn't really turn out, because on the 18th of August 1941, the very famous Butt Report comes out. And the Butt Report states clearly that the best that they're doing right now bombing at night is that 1 out of 3 bombers drops its bombs within 5 miles of its intended target. That's not particularly good unless you're using hydrogen bombs. So then they're not. So it's not pretty good. Post-war analysis actually shows that only 5% of their aircraft are getting within 5 miles of their target at this time. So they have a huge, huge problem, because what are they going to do to attack Germany? And this gentleman, Lord Cherwell, who's a scientific advisor directly to Winston Churchill, he is a scientist, rather well known, and he has Churchill's ear. And he says, what we need to do is we need to, as you may remember when I talked about Duhay, is when Duhay's idea was that they were going to create a nation of refugees by burning cities to the ground. And he says, and he uses a different term for this, he would refer to this as dehousing, which is a very sanitized version of what they're actually going to do. And the thing is Churchill goes along with this whole program for a major reason. First of all, they need to support the Soviet Union. Second of all, they have no capability whatsoever than strategic bombing to attack Germany. And so they say, Churchill goes, okay, we're going to, since we can't hit any precision targets, we're going to drop bombs onto city centers. And the RAF thinks this is great because they've got the same issue going on that we saw earlier with Dowding and the Bomber Command, because they want to make more and more bombers, and now the entire British military is saying, these bombers aren't doing their job. We can't spend this money on this. We could use these bombers better, for example, to close the gap in the Atlantic for the submarines. That would be a better use of these bombers than trying to burn German cities down. We could perhaps use these to support our army in the field and use it for tactical bombing. Rather than make these strategic bombers, we should make tactical bombers that would be much more effective and much more useful for the war at this time. And the RAF, though, the bomber boys, or the bomber barons as they're more referred to, say, no, no, no. If you give us 4,000 heavy bombers at one time, we got to have 4,000 at one time, we're going to create in Germany a nation of refugees. They will be so demoralized and so unhappy that they will overthrow Hitler's government and sue for peace. And that is their idea. They never set a goal for this. They never set a timeline. They just say they're going to do this with 4,000 bombers. But there's really never, ever, ever any really set timeline or anything with this. It's really amazing that this was supported this way, but I think it's primarily due to the fact they needed to hit back at Germany. They had no other way to do it. And I think what's most amazing is Sir Norman Bottomley's comment. Bomber Command's aim must be primarily to destroy the enemy's will to win the war, leaving the destruction of his means to win the war as an incidental or indirect task. So the fact is that he doesn't care about hitting factories. He doesn't care about destroying production. That's incidental. The point is to create this mass of unhappy, war-weary Germans. And what they have done at this point, Britain has basically declared war on the German people. At this point, I would like Helga to come up, if you'd be so kind. And Helga is actually a survivor of the bombing of Germany. And so I'm going to have Helga talk to you for a few minutes in regards to that really terrible time, certainly in Germany. So please welcome her.
Hi, I'm Helga Wilmuth, and I was a German teacher at Auburn High School. I've been retired. Closer. Good. Okay. I was born in 1932, and so when the war started, I was 7 years old. And in the 40s, we started going into our basement. You have to remember that in Europe, people live in apartment buildings. They are not living in private homes. And the city of Hamburg had, the Bürgermeister, the mayor, had every single apartment building equipped one basement room with wooden supports so that people from one apartment building had one room in the basement where they felt safe. So we would go down there. But in 1940, we had a bomb come right in front of our apartment building. And here is a 6-apartment building. We were on this side underneath, and the bomb hit right here in front of the building. And I can still hear it, how it dug itself into the ground, but it didn't explode. It was a dud. I wouldn't be here if it had exploded. From then on, my mother took us to the bunker. The first bunker which we found was close to the S-Bahn, the railroad station, and it was a round tube. So you went down and then you sat down along the side. Then they started making bigger bunkers. And I have a picture here where one bunker is still there. Later on you can come and look at it. This bunker was probably 5 to 6 stories high, was with concrete, had, of course, the flak on top, the anti-aircraft, and it had not a single step in the whole building. Everything went on a continuous incline all the way to the top, so that people could, with baby carriages, just keep on moving in, and when there was no more room, you just sat down on the floor. We always had about half an hour of pre-alarm before the alarm started, so that we could, in the evening, we would put on double underwear, and when the pre-alarm sounded, we would put on our dresses and coats and would run off. And we had probably, at that time, 15 to 20 minute walk to get to the bunker. And my youngest sister, who is 10 years younger than I am, was in the baby carriage, and one wheel would always come off, and we would have to run. Either my sister or I had to run off and slap it back on and keep on running when we went. And we, going to school, we had 6 weeks of vacation suddenly, because there was a dud in the schoolyard which had to be done away with. So we weren't allowed to go to school at that point, which was fun at that time, but looking back, of course, remembering the past.
So at that time, you were out of the city. You were basically a refugee in the Black Forest for that 6 weeks.
I was in the year 1943 when they expected a big attack on the city of Hamburg. They sent school children to the Black Forest for a 6 weeks vacation. And the vacation was done for us then another 6 weeks. My sister and I were in the Schullandheim, school land home. We took naps in the afternoon, and the helpers wrapped us in. We lay down, they put one blanket over one. We were lying like that in the balcony, and we wanted to go home as badly as we want. We just could write letters back home. My father was fighting the Russians on the Russian front, and my mother was alone at home with the baby. But the city of Hamburg, and of course, this is a suburb. The city of Hamburg is on this side. So my mother was safe in 1943. We did not have any damage at that time. Here's a little picture I can show you that I actually was there as a child. This
It does have the swastika flag available there.
yeah.
So
So-
you also used to pick up shrapnel for
Going to school, we always collected shrapnel. We had boxes and we exchanged. The more wonderful the designs were, the more they were worth. 2 of this or 1 of that. And we all wanted to win the war, so we turned it in to be melted, because I found out, though, that my aunt had a very good radio reception, could hear BBC. We did not with our radio, which we had. We only heard what we were supposed to hear.
They made radios that would not, intentionally made radios that would not pick up certain frequencies. And those
Exact-
were sold to the general public, and so that's obviously the kind of radio you had. So those types of radios could not pick up, for example, like she said, the BBC. They were specifically made for German stations.
But I also knew that they could only listen to BBC when they were in the middle of the apartment and had a big blanket over them and had it very, very low, so that the neighbors could not hear that they were doing something they weren't supposed to do.
Right, it was punishable to
So
listen to the BBC.
I was already learning at that time that there was something wrong.
Anything else you'd like to say today? Anything else you'd like to add?
Any questions? But that's just, I wanted to say that yes.
Did your father survive the war?
Yes, he did. He was 2 years in a Russian prison camp, but he came home. He was a medic and was supposed to give preference to the people who were sick to come home, and he put his name on the list and then came home.
So that was actually a short time. Many Germans didn't come back home from Russian prisons for as much as 15 years.
Many didn't come back at all.
Well, yes, that's another option. But 5,000 of the total surrendered people at Stalingrad, only 5,000 ever returned to Germany. So there was immense losses on both sides as far as poor treatment of prisoners.
That's it.
All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Oh, and guess what? You all get a really short break. Okay, well, we talked a little bit about these aircraft. And this aircraft is the Avro Lancaster, or commonly known as a Lank. It is a very heavy 4-engine bomber. It has 4 Merlin engines. It has 8 rifle caliber machine guns. It doesn't fly particularly high. It doesn't fly particularly fast. It does have one good capability. It carries a hell of a lot of bombs. Normal bomb load for this aircraft was 14,000 pounds. It could carry vastly more than that for shorter ranges, and they frequently did up to 20,000 pound bomb loads with this aircraft. The aircraft, again, is loaded with electronic warfare capability. It has radar. It has 2 night bombing capabilities. It has a radar in its tail. It's got a lot of expense to make one of these bombers. They're certainly anything but cheap. And they do drop 608,000 tons of bombs on Europe during World War II, just this one type of bomber. So, again, it's really well suited to what it's used for, but it's not particularly defensible. Notice there is no turret in its belly, so it has no capability for defense from below. Yes?
Those Merlin engines?
Yes, it has 4 Merlin engines, just for that one airplane. Yes?
Did the Germans develop a plane of this size and capacity during the war?
Yes, they did. And it was appropriately named the Grief. It was a terrible aircraft. It's the HE-177. So in other words, did the Germans have a large strategic bomber? Yes, they did. It was a very bad design. Part of the reason it was a bad design was at the time, as we talked about dive bombers, the Germans thought that every plane should have dive bombing capability, including large strategic bombers. That is not particularly a good idea. You don't really need to be able to dive bomb with an aircraft like this, but they tried to incorporate that into the HE-177. So and they also had this remember I showed you that multiple engine for the Italian seaplane racer? They tried to do that same thing to create a multiple 24-cylinder engine so they would have less wind resistance. So it would be definitely more aerodynamic if you had these two engines turned into one big, giant, powerful engine. Problem is that engine had a lot of technical difficulties and it used to catch fire a lot. So, yes, Alan?
What's a long ton?
A long ton? It's a British terminology. It's a little bit larger, I believe, than a regular ton.
2,240.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a little bit larger. Yes?
Why did the British stick with the rifle caliber armament?
Because we couldn't make enough 50 calibers to give it to them. They wanted to include the M2, the very famous 50 caliber machine gun still used today, but we did not have the capability to give them enough M2s to outfit their bombers. They didn't have the capability to really make it. They could make a lot of this gun, and that's why they chose to use it.
Did they make any cannons?
Oh yeah, they used 20 millimeter cannons on later Spitfires, for example. Hispano-Suiza, I believe, is the proper term. Anyway, so the British have the same problem as the Germans. They can't find cities at night. They have two blind bombing aids that they create that are similar to the German thing called Oboe and G. The problem is, again, that they have to station their radio beam guidance systems in England. So the bombers have to fly all the way over France to get to Germany. The problem with that, of course, is going to be that their range is only 300 miles, so they can't really effectively bomb central Germany. They can barely make it to the Ruhr using this capability. So they have to come up with a different idea, and they come up with called H2S. And H2S uses that cavity magnetron radar we talked about previously. Remember, you all have a cavity magnetron in your microwave ovens. And they would use that capability to create the first ground tracking radar, a radar that was sensitive enough because of its centimetric band, not meter band, in order to pick up ground reflections. And they would begin to use the H2S very, very early in the war. Remember, the British Navy wanted the H2S for its anti-submarine aircraft, but many of these actually went first to Bomber Command, again, to attack Germany. And it's a huge debate on how this should have been used, because the second time they use this over a German city, a bomber is shot down and the Germans recover a cavity magnetron. So the Germans very, very early on know the cavity magnetron exists. Because of their inability to produce similar radars, they don't actually produce a cavity magnetron airborne radar until 1945. So it's much, much later capability that they have. But they do have another thing, is that the radar that emits a signal, they can track that signal. And they create a thing called Naxos. It's probably mispronounced. But they create Naxos, and Naxos will be able to detect the radar from these bombers and lead German night fighters to attack them. So it's always a problem when you emit signal that somebody's going to pick that signal up and track you with it. Well, if we look at H2S, and this is an actual picture of the city of Cologne with an H2S pattern, you can see this dark squiggle here. That is the Rhine River. So the ability to attack a pinpoint target with H2S is obviously not very good. Of course, you can hit a city center using this type of radar. So it does help them get capability to hit cities, but it certainly doesn't give them the capability to hit a pinpoint target. As Helga mentioned, the Hamburg, that in July of 43, the British are going to make a concerted, and the U.S. are going to make a concerted effort to destroy this city. They're going to combine H-2S radar, because the radar has a really good differentiation between water and land. And so by flying over water, because it's a coastal city, they're going to get a very good idea of where that city actually is. So they're going to use H-2S radar, and they're also going to use something we would probably refer to as chaff, but they refer to it as window, which is metal foil strips dumped out of airplanes that create a cloud of radar reflection. And what they'll do is they'll send a couple planes in this direction, a couple planes in that direction, and then they'll start dumping window out of the planes in large bales. And this will make a cloud, and it'll appear that that's a bomber formation to the German radar. And so it will spoof the German defenses. They will not know where the attack is actually going to at this time, because they've never used window before. The Germans are well aware that the window capability exists, and the British have been aware of this for several years. But neither side wanted to deploy it because they were afraid that the other side would deploy it as well. So at this point, they decided that indeed they were going to, for this attack, to break this ban and use window or chaff. And the combination of these technologies and the fact that it's extremely dry, it's extremely windy in Hamburg, is the fact that this will create the world's first man-made firestorm. So they will attack the city over 8 days. Day and night, U.S. bombers in the daytime, British bombers at nighttime, and over that 8 days they will kill approximately 35,000 German civilians. They will injure 125,000 more, and they will burn the entire center of that city to the ground. As you can see in this picture, that is what the apartment buildings, similar to what Helga used to live in, looked like in the center of Hamburg. So quickly what will happen is the Germans will have countermeasures to window, because they've known about it all along anyway. The British will never really plan on repeating an 8-day to destroy a city, because they're very afraid that the Germans will begin to concentrate their defenses and they'll start taking too heavy losses. So they won't do this. What they will do is they will try to do a similar thing to Berlin. But Berlin is much further away from England. It is much more spread out. It is much more difficult to attack, and it's also more difficult to find because it's not a coastal city. And they will fail miserably trying to destroy Berlin, and will take extremely heavy losses in night bombers trying to do this. And why will they start to take these losses? Because the Germans, as early as 1940, become to create a thing called the Kammhuber Line, which is named after the commander of this unit. And what it is, it's groups of night fighters in what is known as a Himmelbett. And a Himmelbett would be a canopy bed. And the Himmelbett system is simply this. I have a square, and I have a FRIA radar in that square. I have a night fighter that's assigned to that square. And the FRIA radar will generally pick up, it's not a very discriminative radar, it'll generally pick up a British bomber. A searchlight will light that British bomber up, and that searchlight will guide the night fighter to attack that British bomber. Once again, R.V. Jones gets involved, starts to realize how the German defenses are being deployed, and he comes up with the idea of a bomber stream. So in other words, that bomber stream will go through that Himmelbett as quickly and as densely as possible. The other night fighters at this time are not going to be able to get into that same Himmelbett. There's not enough radar capability, and they're too spread out. So what will happen is the stream will go through. Yes, they will take losses, but the losses will be vastly diminished than a scattered force going in. It's much like the idea of a convoy would be used on the ocean. So that really limits the losses at that time. Well, the Germans are going to improve on this with a different version of Himmelbett. And that version will have two Würzburg radars and a FRIA radar. And the way that works is they will have a FRIA sees the coming attack. The Würzburg locks on to the fighter that's assigned to that Himmelbett. They have a second Würzburg that will then pick out a bomber. They will then, same way the British would do in the daytime, direct that fighter directly to that bomber using two separate radars. So basically it takes three radars to run this thing. The Germans never ever really put in, I think, the amount of capability they probably should have into creating night fighter defenses. But they are very, very effective. At times, for example, one stands out, I believe it was 790 British night bombers, I think it was after Berlin. Of that 790 bombers, 108 are shot down in one night. That is totally unacceptable losses. They can't afford to have losses like that. And if you look at this tail fin, this is from a Messerschmitt 110, we talked about it. It isn't a particularly good daytime fighter, but it becomes a relatively good nighttime fighter. And if you look carefully, you see all these rows that one pilot shot down of British bombers. And you can see this tail fin at the Imperial War Museum in London. It is quite impressive, the amount of casualties that they took, even at night.
So only one pilot would use that aircraft?
Yep, that was his.
That wouldn't be the kills with that aircraft?
That was the kills for that pilot. And they believe that he left that there on the airfield at the end of the war because the airfield was going to be occupied by the British. They believe that he actually left that tail fin there intact just to basically rub their noses in it.
Did you count them?
No, I did not, but it's a lot. It's over 100. He was a hell of a pilot. But maybe if I have time at the end, I'll elaborate on him just a little bit. But we need to keep going. It's pretty interesting. Or see me afterwards. All right, the British have their night bombing. The United States has day bombing. And the United States day bombing is basically to hit what's known as precision targets, or we will call them bottleneck targets. A bottleneck target might be a ball bearing factory. It certainly was considered to be one. It might be the German ability to make synthetic fuel from coal. That's another bottleneck target. And that was the idea, that the U.S. would hit this type of precision target. And they thought really that the B-17 and the B-24, because they could fly much higher than the British aircraft, they could fly faster than the British aircraft, and were much, much more heavily armed, that they would be able to make deep penetrations into Germany without significant losses and the need for escort fighters. They will very quickly be proved wrong. But I found this, I thought it was very interesting, from Air Force Magazine. And it describes dropping bombs in World War II from even precision bombs. So if you drop a B-17 is going 160 miles an hour, it's at 23,000 feet. When it drops its bomb, that bomb is in the air for 38 seconds. It's going to travel almost 2 miles on a vertical before it hits the ground. If by chance I have misjudged my speed of my aircraft by 2 miles per hour, if I have misjudged my elevation of my aircraft by 25 feet, that bomb will miss its target by 115 feet. Not only will that be a factor, but if I've misjudged the wind that's blowing that bomb as it's going down for almost 2 miles, then indeed the bomb is going to miss by a greater margin even than that. Well, if we look at a 500-pound bomb at this time, a 500-pound bomb only has a destructive radius of about, I believe they said, 60 to 90 feet. It will only dig a hole in the ground 2 feet deep, and that hole will be 9 feet wide. So if I miss by 115 feet, I'm not doing a hell of a lot of damage. The other problem is, too, is if I hit a factory and I blow a hole in the roof, the machine tools that are actually in that factory are much, much more difficult to destroy. So it's very difficult to destroy the machinery in the factory. Yes, you can damage the building, but that doesn't necessarily put the thing out of production. So bombs at this time are really not particularly effective in hitting targets that are sturdy. Yes, fuel would be a different issue, but machine tools are relatively impervious to this. Well, the aircraft we were going to primarily use in these daytime raids is the very famous B-17. This is a G model. The G model can be noted by the fact that it has a chin turret. The Germans found out very easily the way to shoot down a B-17 was to attack them from the front. This later version of the B-17, and actually the most common version, had extra defensive armament in the front. This plane is armed with 13 .50 caliber machine guns, the M2 we talked about briefly. It has not the bomb load capability that the British aircraft has, but it can fly much higher, faster, and is much more heavily armed. They think this plane can get through regardless. Unfortunately, they are wrong. But what the main thing they think is that they can use precision bombing, and the way they're going to do that is with a thing called the Norden bomb sight. The very famous Norden bomb sight. When it's made, this is an incredible piece of technology. There's no question of that. It can literally, it's an analog computer that tells you how fast you're going, roughly, how high you are, what the wind is, and it makes all these calculations and feeds them in and drops the bomb. So when I'm using the Norden bomb sight, the plane is actually on autopilot. The bomb sight is actually flying the aircraft. The bombardier, when he sees that he's directly over the target, he pushes the button. In the western desert of the United States, they got 75-foot circular error probability. Amazing technology for 1930s. Problem is, in 1943, under combat conditions in the cloudy skies of Europe, they're only getting 1,200 feet of circular error probability. That's not nearly capable of destroying factories unless you drop a hell of a lot of bombs. And again, they don't carry a lot of bombs. Well, Curtis LeMay, who we talked about numerous times in this class, he says, I'm going to take my very best bombardier and I'm going to make him a lead bombardier. So when that guy says to drop the bombs, everybody else is going to follow and drop the bombs with him. So they're going to salvo all their bombs at one time. This does improve accuracy, but again, not anywhere near what they expected to get out of the Norden bomb sight. And that brings to the fact that the Norden bomb sight was so secret. Better not, you had to swear that you would die before you would give up a Norden bomb sight. You had to swear that you would guard this secret no matter what. The problem is, in 1938, a German spy had actually copied the Norden bomb sight and given it to Germany. So all that secrecy was actually worthless. The Germans actually had a copy of the Norden bomb sight very early. Yes, Avery.
I have a old Looney Tunes cartoon that features the Norden bomb sight and the Nazis trying to get it. Bugs Bunny for video.
Yeah. It's kind of sad, really, if you think about it, that these people went through all this secrecy for this bomb sight, and it was already stolen in 1938. But
Well, did the Germans use it?
oh yes, they made a copy. The Germans did make a copy of the Norden bomb sight and used that as their common bomb sight. But again, they never really did strategic bombing on the level we did. They used it very much on the Eastern Front, though. Okay, so what happens in 1943 is there's going to be this Quebec Conference. And the Quebec Conference is going to do Operation Point Blank, or we would refer to this more as around-the-clock bombing. The United States is going to bomb in the daytime, the British are going to bomb at night, and they're going to use their bombers to destroy the German aviation industry. That's the thinking. Bomber Harris of the British says, oh, okay, well, we'll destroy the British or the German industry by burning their cities to the ground. So they never really buy off on this. The U.S., of course, is going to make their effort to use their bombers in a strategic manner, in a manner to destroy bottleneck targets. Unfortunately, they're going to take some terrible losses trying to daylight raids against Germany in 1943 and into 44, early 44. Really, they don't, but 43 is a disaster. And one of their main targets is going to be ball bearings. They think this is a key target. If we can stop German ball bearings, it will create problems in all kinds of other industries, airframes, engines, everything uses ball bearings. So by destroying ball bearings, and there's only a few factories in Germany that make ball bearings, we can destroy the German economy. Again, a bottleneck target. So they decide they're going to make this major raid August 17, 1943 on two targets. One is Regensburg. Regensburg makes engines for the FW-190 fighter, and they're going to attack Schweinfurt at the same time. And that will be a disaster. 376 bombers go on this raid, 60 are shot down, 58 to 95 are heavily damaged. They do get really good results at Regensburg attack, but they get very poor results at Schweinfurt, which causes them to now launch another attack at Schweinfurt, which will be known in the United States as Black Thursday. Once again, they have not got escort fighters. The escort fighters don't have the range to support these bombers all the way to the target. So there's literally an hour in and an hour out when these planes are unescorted. At this time, the Germans are going to throw everything they possibly can into this attack. And they are starting to create a different type of aircraft. Instead of using their fighters typically to fight other fighters, they're using their fighters to become anti-bomber aircraft. So they start strapping on more and more and more weapons. Well, this makes them very effective against bombers, but it doesn't make them particularly good against other fighters. And the reason is they've got all this drag and all this weight that is making their planes less maneuverable and slower. But they can destroy a bomber. And so as long as there's no fighters around, we're going to do some heavy-duty damage. And indeed they do. So on this particular raid, they destroy 60 B-17s. They totally damage, so they get back to base, but they're written off, another 17, and 121 are damaged out of a force of 291 aircraft. It's a disaster. Yes, Jim? Normally there are 10. Sometimes there are 9, sometimes there are 11, depending on the type of mission.
10 what?
Airmen so how big is the crew of a B-17? It's normally 10. That'd be the normal number. Anyway, notice this picture. So this is an FW-190 fighter. They're putting large rockets on these things to shoot into the bomber formation. They're anti-aircraft rockets. So they can stand off beyond the range of those 50 caliber machine guns and lob rockets into this formation. The problem with that is, of course, that you're carrying more weight and you've got a lot more drag with all this stuff under the wings. So that fighter is now not really a fighter, it's an anti-bomber aircraft. Well, the raid on Schweinfurt actually does significant damage at a terrible cost, of course. But it only knocks the plant out for 6 weeks. The Germans have a significant amount of surplus ball bearings. So this raid really doesn't affect Germany's ability to make aircraft engines and airframes, etc., at all, really. And they easily patch up the roof, and those machine tools are very difficult to damage. They're still workable. So what happens is, at this point, the U.S. decides it's not having any more deep penetration raids into Germany until February of 1944. They will attack the French cities closer where they can be escorted by fighters. But things are going to change rapidly, and the thing that's going to change that is going to be the P-51B fighter aircraft. And there is a P-51B. This is a brilliant design. It's a tremendous U.S. airframe and wing design, a laminar flow wing, mated with that very famous British Merlin engine. And this aircraft is comparable of fighting any other aircraft made at the time. and fighting well. It also has incredibly long range. This aircraft can make it all the way from Britain, all the way to the ends of Germany and back again. So this thing has an amazing capability of being a competitive long-range fighter. Also notice it's very well armed with 6 .50 caliber, again, that famous M2 machine gun, a Leighton version. But Hermann Goering, who's the number 2 guy in Germany and the head of the Luftwaffe, says, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." And indeed, he's correct. Because what's going to happen is in February of 1944 is going to be the big week. And the big week is going to be the Allied effort to destroy the Luftwaffe. And what they will do is they will send their planes in massive waves, defended by P-51Bs, and the Germans, in order to knock down those streams of bombers, have turned their fighter aircraft into anti-bomber aircraft, and they will be slaughtered by P-51s. And the P-51s do a tremendous amount of damage. Now keep this in mind. The Germans are fighting on all 3 fronts, day and night. The British are going in at night. The U.S. is going from the U.K. in the daytime. We have the 15th Air Force flying from Italy. They have the entire Russian Air Force on the Eastern Front. All these forces are going to be combined now to destroy the Luftwaffe. And then you've got another one of my favorite people, Lieutenant General Jimmy Doolittle, who is now in charge of the 8th Air Force. And he says, you know what we need to do? We've got all this range capability now with this P-51. So we're not going to have you just stay close to the bombers. He's going to send these guys out on fighter sweeps, 50, 60 miles ahead of the bombers. And when these German, slower, less maneuverable aircraft are forming up to begin to attack the bombers, these Mustangs will go in and begin to destroy those German aircraft. And indeed, they're incredibly effective at this. The bomber people, remember, Jimmy Doolittle's really not a bomber guy. They go, you know what, we need to be protected. You can't just go flying around. And indeed, he says, nope, we're going to do this, and this tactic is incredibly successful. And you can see a German twin-engine aircraft being used to attack bombers. Again, those planes have no chance against P-51s. Well, the debate over strategic bombing, I think, will never end. I think people will talk about this forever, really. But remember, the British government makes this decision primarily because they have no way to hit back at Germany at that time, and they want to support the Russians. But if you think about the expense of this, these heavy bombers are brutally expensive. You've got 4 engines, you've got all this electronics, you've got highly trained crew members, and the cost of doing this type of warfare is extremely heavy. The numbers are actually, I think, amazing. One of the more larger estimates is that for every pound of explosives that the British dropped on a German city, it cost them 1 pound sterling to do that. So this type of warfare is extremely hard on resources. Well, the British have dropped the majority of their bombs onto city centers. This does not really affect German productivity. The U.S. will drop the bulk of its bombs primarily in suburban areas, but again, the weapons themselves are not very effective at doing that. So again, neither group really achieves the numbers they're looking for, but they certainly flatten a lot of cities. And even the U.S., because of the cloud cover in Europe, 50% of our bombs are dropped by H-2S radar, not using the Norden bomb sight. Well, the effects of this on Germany seem to be far less than we would have expected. But that's primarily due to the fact that the German economy had so much slack. They don't declare total war until 1943. They never mobilized their economy fully until that time. So in 1942, the Germans make 200,000 civilian commercial radios. That probably would have been a better idea to use those radios to help make radar units. They make 150,000 electric blankets, which have absolutely no use whatsoever, in warfare. They make sewing machines. They make all these consumer goods. And Albert Speer says that Hitler expected far less of the German people than Churchill and Roosevelt did of their people. He was always afraid that they would not be willing to go through the sacrifice needed to win the war, and he basically does not achieve production levels that they could have much easier. So when we look at the numbers of aircraft produced, in 42 the Germans make 12,822 aircraft. In 43, now they're being bombed significantly, they make 20,599. In 44, where they're getting bombed tremendously, they make 35,076 aircraft. It's not a lack of aircraft that defeats the Luftwaffe. It's a lack of trained pilots and the fuel to train those people. Well, the morality of bombing is a very difficult topic. Certainly, it is events like Dresden, where there's a tremendous firestorm and a tremendous casualty level for German civilians. The city is viewed as having very limited military value, but yet it is bombed and destroyed. The British begin to disassociate themselves from this because they're taking a lot of heat. And post-war, they do not issue a campaign medal to their bomber command. I think that's unbelievable. There's campaign medals listed, RAF fighter pilots, the Navy, to the Army. There's no campaign medal issued to these people. 125,000 Britons flew for RAF Bomber Command. They take 57,000 are killed. 46% of these guys are killed in action, and they receive no recognition after the war for their efforts. And their efforts were created not by them, but by their leadership. And I think this is shameful that they did this. But the fact of the matter is, the weapons of the Second Industrial Revolution, the slaughter of civilians on both sides, is indeed total war. And with that, I would like to just invite you all to my last class next week. That class will start with D-Day, and then we will look at other technological advances, and we will end with command and control today. So thank you all for coming. I hope to see you all next week. And thank you, Helga.